Alrighty, there it goes. It's working now. My apologies. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to start the greatest cosmic horror love story ever told, in the form of The Nightland by one William Hope Hodgson. This cover here is the same as the edition of it that I have, which is the Collected Fiction of William Hope Hodgson, Volume 4, entitled The Nightland and Other Perilous Romances. So The Nightland was first published back in, oh geez, my gut is saying the 20s. Let me double check here. Sorry, 1912. Why it doesn't say that with the copyright section is anybody's guess. Likely because the copyright had elapsed. Anyway, first published in 1912 by the publisher Evelyn Nash. And it is written... Actually, there's a pretty decent introduction here. Let me just double check to see if there's anything in here that is spoilerific, or if it's just a basic history thereof. Actually, that's more of an introduction just for the collection, so we're going to ignore it. So instead, we will start with the article itself, I reckon, and get crack-a-lackin' on that. There is, I should note, so much cover art. So probably about halfway through this, I'll just set it onto a slideshow I've got set of all the cover art I was able to dig up, and there is so much more that I didn't get in here. I don't have the Japanese covers, for instance. I'm trying to find slightly higher resolution images of those. I'll have them by the time we do this again. I'm guessing... come on, where does it end? It's a fairly burly boy of a book. It just keeps going. Still going. We're at about 400 pages now. There we go. 400 pages. Let me put that there so I know. Excellent. Just shy 400. So I'm thinking a couple installments probably take us at least a month to get through. But yeah, it is. It starts off with kind of this. There'll be. Trying to think of the best way to put this. My brain is zipping. It starts off with a story that takes place in what would have been even archaic and older Victorian era time, roughly, even for when it was written, and then flashes forward to where the actual main plot goes. Shortly after, and then will largely just be underway. I'm trying to think if there's, other than the mentions I've made that this has fairly archaic prose, deliberately archaic prose. There shouldn't be anything too crazy. Since we've gotten through Frankenstein, which frankly I find harder to read aloud than this. But there are parts where you'll be like, okay, okay, get on with it. But the descriptions of things are pretty fantastic. This story wasn't particularly successful or this book wasn't particularly successful when it first was published, but it has developed quite a cult following, I have found. I wish I had known about it before last year or the year before, because it's fantastic. It's in every sense of the word. It's pretty wild. So with that, I'm going to get us started here. I'm going to just get a quick slosh of water in my mouth and we'll get rolling. The Nightland, A Love Tale, by William Hope Hodgson. The dreams that are only dreams. This to be love, that your spirit to live in a natural holiness with the beloved, and your bodies to be a sweet and natural delight that shall be never lost of a lovely mystery. And shame to be unborn, and all things to go wholesome and proper, out of an utter greatness of understanding. And the man to be an hero, and a child before the woman. And the woman to be an holy light of the Spirit, and an utter companion, and in the same time a glad possession unto the man. And this doth be human love. For this to be the especial glory of love, that it doth make unto all sweetness and greatness, and doth be a fire burning all littleness. So that did all in this world to have met the beloved, then did wantonness be dead, and there to grow gladness and charity dancing in the years. Chapter 1. Mirdath the Beautiful. And I cannot touch her face, and I cannot touch her hair, and I kneel to empty shadows, just memories of her grace. And her voice sings in the winds and in the sobs of dawn, and among the flowers at night, and from the brooks at sunrise, and from the sea at sunset, and I answer with vain callings. It was the joy of the sunset that brought us to speech. I was gone a long way from my house, walking lonely-wise, and stopping often that I view the piling upward of the battlements of evening, and to feel the dear and strange gathering of the dusk come over all the world about me. The last time that I paused, I was truly lost in a solemn joy of the glory of the coming night, and maybe I laughed a little in my throat, standing there alone in the midst of the dusk upon the world. And lo, my content was answered out of the trees that bounded the country road upon my right. And it was so, as that someone had said, "And thou also," in glad understanding, that I laughed again a little in my throat, as though I had only a half believing that any true human did answer my laugh, but rather some sweet delusion or spirit that was tuned to my mood. But she spoke and called me by my name, and when I had gone to the side of the road, that I should see her somewhat, and discover whether I knew her, I saw that she was surely that lady, who for her beauty was known all through that sweet country of Kent as Lady Mirdath the Beautiful, and a near neighbour to me, for the estates of her guardian abounded upon mine. Yet until that time I had never met her, for I had been so oft and long abroad, and so much given to my studies and my exercises when at home, that I had no further knowledge of her than rumour gave to me odd time.
and for the rest I was well content, for as I have given hint, my books held me, and likewise my exercises, for I was always an athlete, and never met the man so quick or so strong as I did be, save in some fiction of a tale, or in the mouth of a boaster. Now I stood instantly with my hat in my hand, and answered her gentle bantering so well as I might, the while that I peered intent and wondering at her through the gloom, for truly rumour had told no tale to equal the beauty of this strange maid, who now stood jesting with so sweet a spirit, and claiming kinship of cousinhood with me, as was truth, now that I did wake to think. And truly she made no ado, but named me Frank by my lad's name, and gave laughter and right to me, and gave laughter and right to me to name her Myrdath, and nothing less or more, at that time. And she bid me then to come up through the hedge, and make use of a gap that was her own especial secret, as she confessed, when she took odd leave with her maid to some country frolic, dressed as village maids, but not to deceive many, as I dare believe. And I came up through the gap in the hedge, and stood beside her, and tall she had seemed to me when I looked up at her, and tall she was, in truth. But indeed I was a great head taller. And she invited me then to walk with her to the house, that I meet her guardian, and give word to my sorrow that I had so long neglected to make call upon them, and truly her eyes to shine with mischief and delight, as she named me so for my amissness. But indeed she grew sober in a moment, and she set up her finger to me to hush, as that she heard somewhat in the wood, that lay all the way upon our right. And indeed something I heard too, for there was surely a rustling of the leaves, and anon a dead twig cracked, with a sound clear and sharp in the stillness. And immediately there came 3 men running out of the wood at me, and I called them sharply to keep off or beware of harm, and I put the maid to my back with my left hand, and had my oak staff ready for my use. But the 3 men gave out no word of reply, but ran in at me, and I saw somewhat of the gleam of knives, and at that I moved very glad and brisk to the attack, and behind me there went shrill and sweet the call of a silver whistle, for the maid was whistling for her dogs, and maybe the call was also a signal to the men-servants of her house. Yet, truly, there was no use in help that was yet to come, for the need did be then and instant, and I nowise loath to use my strength before my sweet cousin. And I stepped forward, briskly, as I have told, and the end of my staff I drove into the body of the leftward man, so that he dropped like a dead man. And I hit very sharply at the head of another, and surely cracked it for him, for he made instantly upon the earth. But the 3rd man I met with my fist, and neither had he any great need of a second blow, but went instant to join his companions, and the fight thus to have ended before it was even proper begun, and I laughing a little with a proper pride, to know the bewilderment that I perceived in the way that the Lady Myrdath, my cousin, stood and regarded me through the dusk of the hushed even. But indeed there was no time left to us before there came bounding up 3 great boar-hounds that had been loosed to her whistle, and she had some ado to keep the brutes off me, and I then to beat them off, the men, upon the earth, lest they maul them as they lay. And directly there was a noise of men shouting, and the light of lanthorns in the light, and the footmen to the house to come running with lanthorns and cudgels, and knew not whether to deal with me or not in the first moment, even as the dogs. But when they saw the men upon the ground, and learned my name, and saw me proper, they kept well their distance, and had no lack of respect. But, indeed, my sweet cousin to have the most of any, only that she showed no intent to keep distance of me, but to have a new and deeper feeling of kinship than she at first had shown. And the men-servants asked what should be done with the footpads, seeing that they were now recovering. But, indeed, I left the matter, along with some silver, to the servants, and very sound justice they dealt out to the men, for I heard their cries a good while after we had gone away. Now, when we were come up to the hall, my cousin must take me in to her guardian, Sir Alfred Yarles, an old man and venerable that I knew a little in passing, and because our estates abounded. And she praised me to my face, yet quaintly wise, and the old man, her guardian, thanked me most honourably and with a nice courtesy, so that I was a welcome house-friend from that time onward. And I stayed all that evening, and dined, and afterward went out again into the home grounds with the Lady Murdath, and she more friendly to me than ever any woman had been, and seemed to me as that she had known me always. And truly I had the same feeling in my heart towards her, for it was somehow as though we knew each the way and turn of the other, and had a constant delight to find this thing and that thing to be in common, but no surprise, save that so pleasant a truth had so natural a discovery. And one thing there was that I perceived held the Lady Murdath all that dear forenight, and this was, indeed, the way that I had my pleasure so easy with the 3 footpads. And she asked me plainly whether I was not truly very strong, and when I laughed with young and natural pride, she caught my arm suddenly to discover for herself how strong I might be. And surely she loosed it even the more sudden, and with a little gasping of astonishment, because it was so great and hard. And afterward she walked by me very silent, and seeming thoughtful, but she never went any great way off from me. And truly, if the Lady Murdath had a strange pleasure in my strength, I had likewise a constant wonder and marvel in her beauty, that had shone but the more lovely in the candlelight at dinner. But there were further delights to me in the days that came, for I had happiness in the way that she had pleasure of the mystery of the evening, and the glamour of night, and the joy of dawn, and all such like. And one evening, that I ever remember, as we wandered in the parklands, she began to say, half unthinking, that it was truly an elves' night. And she stopped herself immediately, as though she thought I should have no understanding. But, indeed, I was upon mine own familiar ground of inward delight, and I replied in a quiet and usual voice that the towers of sleep would grow that night, and I felt in my bones that it was a night to find the giant's tomb, or the tree with the great painted head, and surely I stopped very sudden, for she gripped me in that moment, and her hand shook as she held me. But when I would ask her what ailed, she bid me, very breathless, to say on. And, with a half-understanding, I told her that I had but meant to speak of the moon garden, that was an olden and happy fancy of mine. And, in verity, when I said that, the Lady Murdath cried out something in a strange low voice, and brought me to a halt, that she might face me. And she questioned me very earnest, and I answered just so earnest as she, for I was grown suddenly to an excitement, in that I perceived she knew also. And in verity she told me that she had knowledge, but had thought that she was alone in the world with her knowledge of that strange land of her dreams, and now to find that I also had travelled in those dear, strange dreamlands. And truly the marvel of it, as she to say time and oft, and again, as we walked, she gave out word that there was little wonder she had been urged to call me that night, as she saw me pause upon the road, though, indeed, she had learned of our cousinship before, having seen me go by on my horse pretty oft, and inquired concerning me, and mayhap daintily irked that I had so little heed of Lady Murdath the beautiful. But, indeed, I had thought of other matters, yet had been human enough, had I but met her proper before I see her. Now, you must not think that I was not utter stirred by the wonder of this thing, that we had both a dreamful knowledge of the same matters, of which each had thought none the other knew. Yet, when I questioned more, there was much that had been in my fancies that was foreign to her, and likewise much that had been familiar to her that was of no meaning to me. But though there was this that brought a little regret to us, there would be, time and again, some new thing that one told that the other knew and could finish the telling of, to the gladness and amazement of both. And so shall you picture us wandering and having constant speech, so that, hour by hour, we grew gladly aged in dear knowledge and sweet friendship of the other. And truly, how the time passed I know not, but there came presently a hullabaloo, and the shouts of men's voices, and the baying of dogs, and the gleam of lanthorns, so that I knew not what to think, until very sudden, and with a sweet and strange little laughter, the Lady Myrdath to perceive that we had missed the hour's utter in our converse, so that her guardian, made uneasy because of the 3 footpads, had ordered a search. And we all that time a wander together in happy forgetfulness. And we turned homeward then, and came towards the lights. But indeed the dogs found us before we were come there, and they had grown to know me now, and leaped about me, barking very friendly. And so in a minute the men had discovered us, and were gone back to tell Sir Jarls that all was well. And this was the way of our meeting, and the growing of our acquaintance, and the beginning of my great love for Myrdath the Beautiful. Now, from that time onward, evening by evening, I would go a wander along the quiet and country road that led from my estate to the estate of Sir Jarls. And always I went inward by the hedge gap, and oft I should find the Lady Myrdath walking in that part of the woods, but always with her great boar-hounds about her, for I had begged that she do this thing for her sweet safety, and she to seem wistful to pleasure me, but truly to be just so oft utter perverse in divers matters, and to strive to plague me, as though she would discover how much I would endure, and how far she might go to anger me. And truly, well I remember how that one night, coming to the hedge gap, I saw 2 country maids come thence out from the woods of Sir Jarls. But they were naught to me, and I would have gone upward through the gap, as ever, only that, as they passed me, they curtsied somewhat over-graceful for rough wenches. And I had a sudden thought, and came up to them to see them more anigh, and truly I thought the taller was surely the Lady Myrdath. But, indeed, I could not be sure, for when I asked who she did be, she only to simper and to curtsy again, and so I was very natural all in doubt, but yet sufficient in wonder, having some knowledge of the Lady Myrdath, to follow the wenches, the which I did. And they then, very speedy and sedate, as though I were some rackrape that they did well to be feared of alone at night, and so came at last to the village green, where a great dance was afoot, with torches and a wandering fiddler to set the tune, and ale in plenty. And the 2 to join the dance, and danced very hearty, but had only each the other for a partner, and had a good care to avoid the torches. And by this I was pretty sure that they were truly the Lady Myrdath and her maid, and so I took chance, when they had danced somewhat my way, to step over to them, and ask boldly for a dance. But, indeed, the tall one answered, simpering, that she was promised, and immediately gave her hand to a great hulking farmer lout, and went round the green with him, and well punished she was for her waywardness, for she had all her skill to save her pretty feet from his loutish stampings, and very glad she was to meet the end of the dance. And I knew now for certainty that it was Myrdath the Beautiful, despite her plan of disguise, and the darkness, and the wench's dress, and the footgear that marred her step so great. And I walked across to her, and named her, whispering, by name, and gave her plain word to be done of this unwisdom, and I would take her home. But she to turn from me, and she stamped her foot, and went again to the lout, and when she had suffered another dance with him, she bid him be her escort a part of the way, the which he was nothing loath of. And another lad that was mate to him went likewise, and in a moment, so soon as they were gone away from the light of the torches, the rough hind lads made to set their arms about the waists of the 2 wenches, not wetting who they had for companions. And the Lady Murdath was no longer able to endure, and cried out in her sudden fear and disgust, and struck the rough hind that embraced her so hard that he loosed her a moment, swearing great oaths. And directly he came back to her again, and had her in a moment to kiss her, and she, loathing him to the very death, beat him madly in the face with her hands, but to no end, only that I was close upon them. And in that moment, she screamed my name aloud, and I caught the poor lout and hit him once, but not to harm him overmuch, yet to give him a long memory of me, and afterward I threw him into the side of the road. But the second hind, having heard my name, loosed from the tiring maid, and ran for his life, and, indeed, my strength was known all about that part. And I caught Murdath the Beautiful by her shoulders, and shook her very soundly in my anger. And afterward I sent the maid onward, and she, having no word from her mistress to stay, went forward a little, and in this fashion we came at last to the hedge gap, with the Lady Murdath very hushed, but yet walking anigh to me, as though she had some secret pleasure of my nearness. And I led her through the gap, and so homeward to the hall, and there bid her good night at a side door that she held the key of. And truly she bid me good night in an utter quiet voice, and was almost as that she had no haste to be gone from me that night. Yet, when I met her on the morrow, she was full of a constant impudence to me, so that, having her alone to myself, when the dusk was come, I asked her why she would never be done of her waywardness, because I ached to have companionship of her, and, instead, she denied my need. And, at that, she was at once very gentle, and full of a sweet and winsome understanding, and surely knew that I wished to be rested, for she brought out her harp, and played me dear olden melodies of our childhood days all that evening, and so had my love for her the more intent and glad. And she saw me that night to the hedge gap, having her 3 great boarhounds with her, to company her home again. But, indeed, I followed her afterwards, very silent, until I saw her safe into the hall, for I would not have her alone in the night, though she believed that I was then far away on the country road. And as she walked with her dogs, one or another would run back to me, to nose against me friendly-wise. But I sent them off again very quiet, and she had no knowledge of aught, for she to go singing a love-song quietly all the way home. But whether she loved me, I could not tell, though she had a nice affection for me. Now, on the following evening, I went somewhat early to the gap, and lo, who should be standing in the gap, talking to the Lady Murdath, but a very clever dressed man, that had a look of the court about him. And he, when I approached, made no way for me through the gap, but stood firm, and eyed me very insolent, so that I put out my hand and lifted him from my way.
No, bud. You are in my way. I am positioning you here, and now I'm going through.
And lo, the Lady Murdath turned a bitterness of speech upon me that gave me an utter pain and astonishment, so that I was assured in a moment that she had no true love for me, or she had never striven so to put me to shame before the stranger, and named me uncouth and brutal to a smaller man. And, indeed, you shall perceive how I was in my heart at that moment. And I saw that there was some seeming of justice in what the Lady Murdath said, but yet might the man have shown a better spirit, and moreover, Murdath the Beautiful had no true call to shame me, her true friend and cousin, before this stranger. Yet did I not stop to argue, but bowed very low to the Lady Murdath, and afterward I bowed a little to the man and made apology, for, indeed, he was neither great nor strong-made, and I had been better man to have shown courtesy to him, at least in the first. And so, having done justice to my own respect, I turned and went on, and left them to their happiness. Now I walked then maybe 20 good miles before I came to my own home, for there was no rest in me all that night, or ever, because that I was grown deadly in love of Myrdath the Beautiful, and all my spirit and heart and body of me pained with the dreadful loss that I was come so sudden upon. And for a great week I had my walks in another direction, but in the end of that week I must take my walk along the olden way, that I might chance to have but a sight of my lady. And truly I had all sight that ever man did need to put him in dread pain and jealousy, for truly, as I came in view of the gap, there was the Lady Myrdath walking just without the borders of the great wood, and beside her there walked the clever-dressed man of the court, and she suffered his arm around her, so that I knew they were lovers, for the Lady Myrdath had no brothers, nor any youthful men kin. Yet when Myrdath saw me upon the road, she shamed in a moment to be so caught, for she put her lover's arm from about her, and bowed to me, a little changed of colour in the face, and I bowed very low, being but a young man myself, and so passed on, with my heart very dead in me. And as I went, I saw that her lover came again to her, and had his arm once more about her, and so, maybe, they looked after me, as I went very stiff and desperate. But, indeed, I looked not back on them, as you may think. And for a great month then I went not near to the gap, for my love raged in me, and I was hurt in my pride, and, truly, neither had a true justice been dealt to me by the Lady Myrdath. Yet in that month my love was a leaven in me, and made slowly a sweetness and a tenderness and an understanding that were not in me before, and truly love and pain do shape the character of man. And in the end of that time I saw a little way into life, with an understanding heart, and began presently to take my walks again past the gap. But truly Myrdath the Beautiful was never to my sight, though one evening I thought she might not be a great way off. For one of her great boarhounds came out of the wood, and down into the road to nose against me, very friendly, as a dog oft doth with me. Yet, though I waited a good time after the dog had left me, I had no sight of Myrdath, and so passed on again, with my heart heavy in me, but without bitterness, because of the understanding that was begun to grow in my heart. Now there passed 2 weary and lonely weeks, in which I grew sick to have knowledge of the beautiful maid. And truly, in the end of that time, I made a sudden resolving that I would go in through the gap, and come to the home grounds about the hall, and so maybe have some sight of her. And this resolving I had one evening, and I went out immediately, and came to the gap, and went in through the gap, and so by a long walking to the gardens about the hall. And truly, when I was come there, I saw a good light of lanthorns and torches, and a great company of people dancing, and all dressed in quaint dress, so that I knew they had a festival for some cause. And there came suddenly a horrid dread into my heart that this might be the marriage dance of the Lady Myrdath, but indeed this was foolishness, for I had surely heard of the marriage, if there had been any. And truly, in a moment, I remembered that she was come 21 years of age on that day, and to the end of her wardship, and this surely to be the festival in honour of the same. And a very bright and pretty matter it was to watch, save that I was so heavy in the heart with loneliness and longing, for the company was great and gay, and the lights plentiful, and set all about from the trees, and in leaf-made arbours about the great lawn. And a great table spread with eating matters and silver and crystal, and great lamps of bronze and silver went all adown one end of the lawn, and the dance constant upon the other part. And surely the Lady Myrdath to step out of the dance, very lovely dressed, yet seeming to mine eyes, a little pale in the looming of the lights, and she to wander to a seat to rest, and, indeed, in a moment there to be a dozen youths of the great families of the countryside in attendance about her, making talk and laughter, and each eager for her favour, and she very lovely in the midst of them, but yet, as I think, but yet, as I did think, lacking of somewhat, and a little pale-seeming, as I have told. And her glance to go oddwise beyond the grouped men about her, so that I understood in a moment that her lover was not there, and she to be alack in the heart for him. Yet why he was not there I could not suppose, save that he might have been called back to the court. And surely, as I watched the other young men about her, I burned with a fierce and miserable jealousy of them, so that I could near have stepped forth and plucked her out from among them, and had her to walk with me in the woods, as in the olden days, when she also had seemed near to love. But truly, what use to this? For it was not they who held her heart, as I saw plain, for I watched her, with an eager and lonesome heart, and knew that it was one small man of the court that was lover to her, as I have told. And I went away again then, and came not near the gap for 3 great months, because that I could not bear the pain of my loss. But in the end of that time my very pain to urge me to go, and to be worse than the pain of not going, so that I found myself one evening in the gap, peering, very eager and shaken, across the sward that lay between the gap and the woods, for this same place to be as an holy ground to me, for there was it first. Oh, for there was it that first I saw Myrdath the beautiful, and surely lost my heart to her in that one night. And a great time I stayed there in the gap, waiting and watching hopelessly. And lo, sudden there came something against me, touching my thigh very soft, and when I looked down it was one of the boarhounds, so that my heart leaped, near frightened, for truly my lady was somewhere nigh, as I did think. And as I waited, very hushed and watchful, yet with an utter beating heart, surely I heard a faint and low singing among the trees, so utter sad. And lo, it was Myrdath singing a broken love-song, and a wander there in the dark alone, save for her great dogs. And I harked, with strange pain in me, that she did be so in pain, and I ached to bring her ease, yet moved not, but was very still there in the gap, save that my being was all in turmoil. And presently, as I harked, there came a slim white figure out from among the trees, and the figure cried out something, and came to a quick pause, as I could see in the half-dark. And lo, in that moment there came a sudden and unreasoned hope unto me. And I came up out of the gap, and was come to Myrdath in a moment, calling very low and passionate and eager, Myrdath! 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 And this way I came to her, and her great dog that was with me, to bound beside me, in thought, mayhap, that it was some game. And when I came to the Lady Myrdath, I held out my hands to her, not knowing what I did, but only the telling of my heart that needed her so utter, and craved to ease her of pain. And lo, she put out her arms to me, and came into mine arms with a little run. And there she bode, weeping strangely, but yet with rest upon her, even as rest was sudden, even as rest was come sudden and wondrous upon me. And sudden she moved in mine arms, and slipped her hands to me, very dear, and held her lips up to me, like some sweet child, that I kiss her. But, indeed, she was also a true woman, and in honest and dear love of me. And this to be the way of our betrothal, and simple and wordless it was, yet sufficient, only that there is no sufficiency in love. Now, presently, she loosed herself out of mine arms, and we walked homeward through the woods, very quiet, and holding hands, as children do. And I then in a while to ask her about the man of the court, and she laughed very sweet into the silence of the wood, but gave me no answer, save that I wait until we were come into the hall. And when we were come there, she took me into the great hall, and made a very dainty and impudent bow, mocking me, and so made me known to another lady, who sat there upon her task of embroidering, which she did very demure, and as that she had also a dainty mischief lurking in her. And truly, the Lady Myrdath never to be done of naughty laughter, that made her dearly breathless with delight, and to sway a little, and set the trembling of pretty sounds in her throat. And surely she must pull down 2 great pistols from an arm-rack, that I fight a duel to the death with the lady of the embroidering, who held her face down over her work, and shook likewise with the wickedness of her laughter that she could not hide. And in the end the lady of the embroidering looked up sudden into my face, and I then to see somewhat of the mischief in a moment, for she had the face of the man of the court suit that had been lover to Myrdath. And the Lady Myrdath then to explain to me how that Mistress Alison, which was her name, was a dear and bosom friend, and she it was that had been dressed in the court suit to play a prank for a wager with a certain young man who would be lover to her, as an he might. And I then to come along, and so speedy to offence that truly I never saw her face plain, because that I was so utter jealous. And so the Lady Myrdath had been more justly in anger than I supposed, because that I had put hands upon her friend, as I have told. And this to be all of it, save that they had planned to punish me, and had met every evening at the Gap, to play at lovers, perchance I should pass, so that I should have greater cause for my jealousy, and truly they to have good revenge upon me, for I had suffered very great a long while because of it. Yet, as you do mind, when I came upon them, the Lady Myrdath had a half regret. That was very natural, because even then she was in love of me, as I of her, and because of this she drew away, as you shall remember, being, as she confessed, suddenly and strangely troubled, and to want me, but afterwards as much set again to my punishment, because that I bowed so cold and went away. And indeed well I might. Yet truly all was safe ended now, and I utter thankful, and with a mad delight in the heart, so that I caught up Myrdath, and we danced very slow and stately around the great hall, the while that Mistress Alison whistled us a tune with her mouth, which she could very clever, as many another thing, I wot. And each day and all day after this gladness, Myrdath and I could never be apart, but must go a wander always together, here and there, in an unending joy of our togetherness. And in 1,000 things we were at one in delight, for we had both of us that nature which doth love the blue of eternity, which gathers beyond the wings of the sunset, and the invisible sound of the starlight falling upon the world, and the quiet of grey evenings when the towers of sleep are builded unto the mystery of the dusk, and the solemn green of strange pastures in the moonlight, and the speech of the sycamore unto the beach, and the slow way of the sea when it doth mood, and the soft rustling of the night clouds. And likewise had we eyes to see the dancer of the sunset, casting her mighty robes so strange, and ears to know that there shakes a silent thunder over the face of dawn, and much else that we knew and saw and understood together in our utter joy. Now there happened to us about this time a certain adventure that came near to the cause of the death of Myrdath the Beautiful. For one day as we wandered, as ever, like 2 children in our contentment, I made remark to Myrdath that there were only 2 of the great boarhounds with us, and she then told me that the 3rd was to the kennels, being sick. Yet, scarce as she had told me so much, ere she cried out something and pointed, and lo, I saw that the 3rd hound came towards us, at a run, yet very strange seeming in his going. And in a moment Myrdath cried out that the hound was mad, and truly I saw then that the brute slavered as he came running. And in a moment he was upon us, and made never a sound, but leaped at me in one instant of time, all before I had any thought of such intent. But surely my beautiful one had a dreadful love for me, for she cast herself at the dog, to save me, calling to the other hounds. And she was bitten in a moment by the brute, as she strove to hold him off from me. But I to have him instant by the neck and the body, and break him, so that he died at once, and I cast him to the earth, and gave help to Myrdath, that I draw poison from the wounds. And this I did so well as I might, despite that she would have me stop. And afterwards I took her into mine arms, and ran very fierce all the long and weary way to the hall, and with hot skewers I burned the wounds, so that when the doctor came, he to say I have saved her by my care, if indeed she was to be saved. But truly she had saved me in any wise, as you shall think, so that I could never be done of honour to her. And she very pale, but yet to laugh at my fears, and to say that she soon to have her health, and the wounds healed very speedy. But indeed it was a long and bitter time before they were proper healed, and she was so well as ever. Yet in time so it was, and an utter weight off my heart. And when Myrdath was grown full strong again, we set our wedding day. And well do I mind how she stood there in her bridal dress on that day, so slender and lovely as may love have stood in the dawn of life, and the beauty of her eyes that had such sober sweetness in them, despite the dear mischief of her nature, and the way of her little feet, and the loveliness of her hair, and the dainty rogue grace of her movements, and her mouth an enticement, as that a child and a woman smiled out of the one face. And this to be no more than but a hint of the loveliness of my beautiful one. And so we were married. Myrdath, my beautiful one, lay dying, and I had no power to hold death backward from such dread intent. In another room I heard the little wail of the child, and the wail of the child waked my wife back into this life, so that her hands fluttered white and desperately needful upon the coverlid. I kneeled beside my beautiful one, and reached out and took her hands very gentle into mine, but still they fluttered so needful, and she looked at me, dumbly, but her eyes beseeching. Then I went out of the room, and called gently to the nurse, and the nurse brought in the child, wrapped very softly in a long white robe. And I saw the eyes of my beautiful one grow clearer with a strange lovely light, and I beckoned to the nurse to bring the babe near. My wife moved her hands very weakly upon the coverlid, and I knew that she craved to touch her child, and I signed to the nurse, and took my child in mine arms, and the nurse went out from the room, and so we three were alone together. Then I sat very gentle upon the bed, and I held the babe near to my beautiful one, so that the wee cheek of the babe touched the white cheek of my dying wife, but the weight of the child I kept off from her. And presently I knew that Myrdath, my wife, strove dumbly to reach for the hands of the babe, and I turned the child more towards her, and slipped the hands of the child into the weak hands of my beautiful one. And I held the babe above my wife, with an utter care, so that the eyes of my dying one looked into the young eyes of the child. And presently, in but a few moments of time, though it had been some ways an eternity, my beautiful one closed her eyes and lay very quiet. And I took away the child to the nurse, who stood beyond the door. And I closed the door, and came back to mine own, that we have those last instants alone together. And the hands of my wife lay very still and white, but presently they began to move softly and weakly, searching for somewhat, and I put out my great hands to her, and took her hands with an utter care, and so a little time passed. Then her eyes opened, quiet and grey, and a little dazed seeming, and she rolled her head on the pillow and saw me, and the pain of forgetfulness went out of her eyes, and she looked at me with a look that grew in strength unto a sweetness of tenderness and full understanding. And I bent a little to her, and her eyes told me to take her into mine arms for those last minutes. Then I went very gentle upon the bed, and lifted her with an utter and tender care, so that she lay suddenly strangely restful against my breast. For love gave me skill to hold her, and love gave my beautiful one a sweetness of ease in that little time that was left to us. And so we twain were together, and love seemed that it had made a truce with death in the air about us, that we be undisturbed. For there came a drowse of rest even upon my tense heart, that had known nothing but a dreadful pain through the weary hours. And I whispered my love silently to my beautiful one, and her eyes answered, and the strangely beautiful and terrible moments passed by into the hush of eternity. And suddenly Murdath, my beautiful one, spoke, whispering something, and I stooped gently to hark, and mine own spoke again, and lo, it was to call me by the olden love name that had been mine through all the utter lovely months of our togetherness. And I began again to tell her of my love, that should pass beyond death, and lo, in that one moment of time the light went out of her eyes, and my beautiful one lay dead in mine arms. My beautiful one. Chapter 2. The Last Redoubt. Since Murdath, my beautiful one, died and left me lonely in this world, I have suffered an anguish, and an utter and dreadful pain of longing, such as truly no words shall ever tell. For, in truth, I that had all the world through her sweet love and companionship, and knew all the joy and gladness of life, have known such lonesome misery as doth stun me to think upon. Yet am I to my pen again, for of late a wondrous hope has grown in me, in that I have, at night in my sleep, waked into the future of this world, and seen strange things and utter marvels, and known once more the gladness of life. For I have learned the promise of the future, and have visited in my dreams those places where in the womb of time she and I shall come together, and part, and again come together, breaking asunder most drearily in pain, and again reuniting after strange ages, in a glad and mighty wonder. And this is the utter strange story of that which I have seen, and which truly I must set out, if the task be not too great, so that, in the setting out thereof, I may gain a little ease of the heart, and likewise, mayhap, give ease of hope to some other poor human that doth suffer, even as I have suffered so dreadful with longing for mine own that is dead. And some shall read and say that this thing was not, and some shall dispute with them. But to them all I say not. But to them all I say not, save read. And having read that which I set down, then shall one and all have looked towards eternity with me, unto its very portals. And so to my telling. To me, in this last time of my visions, of which I would tell, it was not as if I dreamed, but, as it were, that I waked there into the dark, in the future of this world. And the sun had died, and for me thus newly waked into that future, to look back upon this, our present age, was to look back into dreams that my soul knew to be of reality, but which to those newly seeing eyes of mine appeared but as a far vision, strangely hallowed with peacefulness and light. Always it seemed to me, when I awakened into the future, into the everlasting night that lapped this world, that I saw near to me, and girdling me all about, a blurred grayness. And presently this, the greyness, would clear and fade from about me, even as a dusky cloud, and I would look out upon a world of darkness, lit here and there with strange sights. And with my waking into that future I waked not to ignorance, but to a full knowledge of those things which lit the night land, even as a man wakes from sleep each morning, and knows immediately he wakes the names and knowledge of the time which has bred him, and in which he lives. And the same while a knowledge I had, as it were subconscious, of this present, this early life which now I live so utterly alone. In my earliest knowledge of that place, I was a youth, 17 years grown, and my memory tells me that when first I waked, or came, as it might be said, to myself in that future, I stood in one of the embrasures of the last redoubt, that great pyramid of grey metal which held the last millions of this world from the powers of the slayers. And so full am I of the knowledge of that place, that scarce can I believe that none here know. And because I have such difficulty, it may be that I speak over familiarly of those things of which I know, and heed not to explain much that it is needful that I should explain to those who must read here, in this our present day. For there, as I stood and looked out, I was less the man of years of this age than the youth of that, with the natural knowledge of that life which I had gathered by living all my 17 years of life there. Though, until that my first vision, I, of this age, knew not of that other and future existence, yet woke to it so naturally as may a man wake here in his bed to the shining of the morning sun, and know it by name, and the meaning of aught else. And yet, as I stood there in the vast embrasure, I had also a knowledge or memory of this present life of ours, deep down within me, but touched with a halo of dreams, and yet with a conscious longing for one, known even there in a half-memory as Mirdath. As I have said, in my earliest memory, I mind that I stood in an embrasure, high up in the side of the pyramid, and looked outwards through a queer spy-glass to the northwest. I, full of youth and with an adventurous and yet half-fearful heart. And in my brain was, as I have told, the knowledge that had come to me in all the years of my life in the redoubt. And yet, until that moment, this man of this present time had no knowledge of that future existence, and now I stood and had suddenly the knowledge of a life already spent in that strange land, and deeper within me the misty knowings of this our present age, and, maybe, also of some others. To the northwest I looked through the queer spy-glass, and saw a landscape that I had looked upon and pored upon through all the years of that life, so that I knew how to name this thing and that thing, and give the very distances of each and every one from the centre point of the pyramid, which was that which had neither length nor breadth, and was made of polished metal in the room of mathematics, where I went daily to my studies. To the northwest I looked, and in the wide field of my glass saw plain the bright glare of the fire from the red pit shine upwards against the underside of the vast chin of the northwest watcher, the watching thing of the northwest, that which hath watched from the beginning and until the opening of the gateway of eternity, came into my thoughts as I looked through the glass. The words of Easworth, the ancient poet, though incredibly future to this our time. And suddenly they seemed at fault, for I looked deep down into my being, and saw, as dreams are seen, the sunlight and splendor of this our present age, and I was amazed. And here I must make it clear to all that, even as I waked from this age and suddenly into that life, so must I, that youth there in the embrasure, have awakened then to the knowledge of this far back life of ours, seeming to him a vision of the very beginnings of eternity, in the dawn of the world. Oh, I do but dread I make it not sufficient clear that I and he were both I, the same soul. He of that far date seeing vaguely the life that was, that I do now live in this present age, and I of this time beholding the life that I yet shall live. How utterly strange! And yet I do not know that I speak wholly truth to say that I, in that future time, had no knowledge of this life and age before that awakening, for I woke to find that I was one who stood apart from the other youths, in that I had a dim knowledge, visionary, as it were, of the past, which confounded, whilst yet it angered, those who were the men of learning of that age, though of this matter more anon. But this I do know, that from that time onwards my knowledge and assuredness of the past was tenfold, for this my memory of that life told me. And so to further my telling. Yet, before I pass onwards, one other thing is there of which I shall speak, in the moment in which I waked out of that youthfulness into the assured awareness of our age. In that moment the hunger of this my love flew to me across the ages, so that what had been but a memory dream grew to the pain of reality, and I knew suddenly that I lacked. And from that time onwards I went, listening, as even now my life is spent. And so it was that I, fresh born in that future time, hungered strangely for my beautiful one, with all the strength of that new life, knowing that she had been mine, and might live again, even as I. And so, as I have said, I hungered, and found that I listened. And now, to go back from my digression, it was, as I have said, Okay, and now, to go back from my digression, it was, as I have said, I had amazement at perceiving, in memory, the unknowable sunshine and splendor of this age breaking so clear through my hitherto most vague and hazy visions, so that the ignorance of Easeworth was shouted to me by the things which now I knew. And from that time onward, for a little space, I was stunned with all that I knew and guessed and felt, and all of a long while the hunger grew for that one I had lost in the early days, she who had sung to me in those fairy days of light that had been in verity. And the especial thoughts of that age looked back with a keen, regretful wonder into the gulf of forgetfulness. But presently I turned from the haze and pain of my dream memories once more to the inconceivable mystery of the night land, which I viewed through the great embrasure. For on none did it ever come with weariness to look out upon all the hideous mysteries, so that old and young watched, from early years to death, the black monstrosity of the night land, which this our last refuge of humanity held at bay. To the right of the red pit there lay a long, sinuous glare, which I knew as the veil of red fire, and beyond that, for many dreary miles, the blackness of the night land, across which came the coldness of the light from the plain of blue fire. And then, on the very borders of the unknown lands, there lay a range of low volcanoes, which lit up, far away in the outer darkness, the black hills, where shone the seven lights, which neither twinkled nor moved nor faltered through eternity, and of which even the great spyglass could make no understanding, nor had any adventurer from the pyramid ever come back to tell us aught of them. And here let me say that down in the great library of the redoubt were the histories of all those, with their discoveries, who had ventured out into the monstrousness of the night land, risking not the life only, but the spirit of life. And surely it is all so strange and wonderful to set out, that I could almost despair with the contemplation of that which I must achieve, for there is so much to tell, and so few words given to man by which he may make clear that which lies beyond the sight and the present and general knowings of peoples. How shall you ever know, as I know in verity, of the greatness and reality and terror of the thing that I would tell plain to all? For we, with our puny span of recorded life, must have great histories to tell, but the few bare details we know concerning years that are but a few thousands in all. And I must set out to you in the short pages of this my life there a sufficiency of the life that had been, and the life that was, both within and without that mighty pyramid, to make clear to those who may read the truth of that which I would tell, and the histories of that great redoubt dealt not with odd thousands of years, but with very millions, aye, away back into what they of that age conceived to be the early days of the earth, when the sun, maybe, still gloomed dully in the night sky of the world. But of all that went before, nothing, save as myths, and matters to be taken most cautiously, and believed not by men of sanity and proved wisdom. And how shall I make all this clear to you who may read? The thing cannot be, and yet I must tell my history, for to be silent before so much wonder would be to suffer of too full a heart, and I must even ease my spirit by this my struggle to tell to all how it was with me, and how it will be. Aye, even to the memories which were the possession of that far future youth, who was indeed I, of his childhood's days, when his nurse of that age swung him, and crooned impossible lullabies of this mythical sun, which, according to those future fairy tales, had once passed across the blackness that now lay above the pyramid. Such is the monstrous futureness of this, which I have seen through the body of that far-off youth. And so, back to my telling. To my right, which was to the north, there stood, very far away, the House of Silence upon a low hill. And in that house were many lights, and no sound. And so had it been through an uncountable eternity of years. Always those steady lights, and no whisper of sound, not even such as our distant microphones could have discovered. And the danger of this house was accounted the greatest danger of all those lands. And round by the House of Silence wound the road where the Silent Ones walk. And concerning this road, which passed out of the unknown lands, nigh by the place of the abhumans, where was always the green luminous mist, nothing was known, save that it was held that, of all the works about the mighty pyramid, it was, alone, the one that was bred, long ages past, of healthy human toil and labor. And on this point alone had 1,000 books, and more, been writ, and all contrary, and so to no end, as is ever the way in such matters. And as it was with the road where the Silent Ones walk, so that it was with all those other monstrous things. Whole libraries had there been made upon this and upon that, and many 1,000 million mouldered into the forgotten dust of the earlier world. I mind me now that presently I stepped upon the central travelling roadway which spanned the 1,000th plateau of the great redoubt. And this lay 6 miles and 30 fathoms above the plain of the Nightland, and was somewhat of a great mile or more across. And so, in a few minutes, I was at the southeastern wall, and looking out through the great embrasure towards the 3 silver fire holes that shone before the thing that nods, away down far in the southeast. Southward of this, but nearer, there rose the vast bulk of the southeast watcher, the watching thing of the southeast. And to the right and to the left of the squat monster burned the torches, maybe half a mile upon each side, yet sufficient light that they threw to show the lumbered forward head of the never-sleeping brute. To the east, as I stood there in the quietness of the sleeping time on the 1000th plateau, I heard a far, dreadful sound, down in the lightless east, and, presently, again, a strange, dreadful laughter, deep as a low thunder among the mountains. And because this sound came odd whiles from the unknown lands beyond the Valley of the Hounds, we had named that far and never-seen place the country whence comes the great laughter. And though I had heard the sound many and oft a time, yet did I never hear it without a most strange thrilling of my heart, and a sense of my littleness, and of the utter terror which had beset the last millions of the world. Yet, because I had heard the laughter oft, I paid not over long attention to my thoughts upon it, and when, in a little it died away into the eastern darkness, I turned my spyglass upon the giant's pit, which lay to the south of the giant's kilns. And these same kilns were tended by the giants, and the light of the kilns was red and fitful, and threw wavering shadows and lights across the mouth of the pit, so that I saw giants crawling up out of the pit, but not properly seen by reason of the dance of the shadows. And so, because ever there was so much to behold, I looked away, presently, to that which was plainer to be examined. To the back of the giant's pit was a great black headland that stood vast, between the Valley of the Hounds, where lived the monstrous night hounds, and the giants. And the light of the kilns struck the brow of this black headland, so that, constantly, I saw things peer over the edge, coming forward a little into the light of the kilns, and drawing back swiftly into the shadows. And thus it had been ever, through the uncounted ages, so that the headland was known as the headland from which strange things peer, and thus was it marked in our maps and charts of that grim world. And so I could go on ever, of this... I skipped a line. And so I could go on ever, but that I fear to weary, and yet, whether I do weary or not, I must tell of this country that I see, even now as I set my thoughts down, so plainly that my memory wanders in a hushed and secret fashion along its starkness, and amid its strange and dread habitants, so that it is but by an effort I realize me that my body is not there in this very moment that I write. And so to further tellings. Before me ran the road where the Silent Ones walk, and I searched it, as many a time in my earlier youth had I, with the spyglass, for my heart was always stirred mightily by the sight of those Silent Ones. And presently, alone in all the miles of that night-grey road, I saw one in the field of my glass, a quiet, cloaked figure, moving along, shrouded, and looking neither to right nor left. And thus was it with these beings ever. It was told about in the redoubt that they would harm no human, if but the human did keep a fair distance from them, but that it were wise never to come close upon one. And this I can well believe. And so, searching the road with my gaze, I passed beyond this Silent One, and past the place where the road, sweeping vastly to the southeast, was lit a space, strangely, by the light from the silver fire holes, and thus at last to where it swayed to the south of the dark palace, and thence southward still, until it passed round to the westward, beyond the mountain bulk of the watching thing in the south, the hugest monster in all the visible nightlands. My spyglass showed it to me with clearness, a living hill of watchfulness, known to us as the Watcher of the South. It brooded there, squat and tremendous, hunched over the pale radiance of the glowing dome. Much, I know, had been writ concerning this odd, vast watcher, for it had grown out of the blackness of the south unknown lands for a million years. For it had grown out of the blackness of the south unknown lands a million years gone, and the steady growing nearness of it had been noted and set out at length by the men they called monstruacans, so that it was possible to search in our libraries and learn of the very coming of this beast in the olden time. And, while I mind me, there were even then, and always, men named monstruacans, which is spelled Monstruwacans, monstruacans, whose duty it was to take heed of the great forces, and to watch the monsters and the beasts that beset the great pyramid, and measure and record, and have so full a knowledge of these same that, did one but sway and head in the darkness, the same matter was set down with particularness in the records. And so to tell more about the South Watcher. A million years gone, as I have told, came it out from the blackness of the south, and grew steadily nearer through 20,000 years, but so slow that in no 1 year could a man perceive that it had moved. Yet it had movement, and had come thus far upon its road to the redoubt, when the glowing dome rose out of the... Yet it had movement, and had come thus far upon its road to the redoubt, when the glowing dome rose out of the ground before it, growing slowly. And this had stayed the way of the monster, so that through an eternity it had looked towards the pyramid across the pale glare of the dome, and seeming to have no power to advance nearer. And because of this, much had been writ to prove that there were other forces than evil at work in the night lands, about the last redoubt. And this I have always thought to be wisely said, and, indeed, there to be no doubt to the matter, for there were many things in the time of which I have knowledge, which seemed to make clear that, even as the forces of darkness were loose upon the end of man, so were there other forces out to do battle with the terror, though in most ways strange and unthought of by the human mind. And of this I shall have more to tell anon. And here, before I go further with my telling, let me set out some of that knowledge which yet remains so clear within my mind and heart. Of the coming of these monstrosities and evil forces, no man could say much with verity, for the evil of it began before the histories of the great redoubt were shaped, aye, even before the sun had lost all power to light, though it must not be a thing of certainty that even at this far time the invisible black heavens held no warmth for this world. But of this I have no room to tell, and must pass on to that of which I have a more certain knowledge. The evil must surely have begun in the days of the darkening, which I might liken to a story which was believed doubtfully, much as we of this day believe the story of the creation. A dim record there was of olden sciences, that are yet far off in our future, which, disturbing the unmeasurable outward powers, had allowed to pass the barrier of life some of those monsters and abhuman creatures which are so wondrously cushioned from us at this normal present. And thus there had materialized, and in other cases developed, grotesque and horrible creatures, which now beset the humans of this world. And where there was no power to take on material form, there had been allowed to certain dreadful forces to have power to affect the life of the human spirit. And this growing very dreadful, and the world full of lawlessness and degeneracy, there had banded together the sound of millions, and built the last redoubt, there in the twilight of the world. So it seems to us, and yet to them, bred at last to the peace of usage, as it were the beginning. And this I can make no clearer, and none hath right to expect it, for my task is very great, and beyond the power of human skill. And when the humans had built the Great Pyramid, it had 1,320 floors, and the thickness of each floor was according to the strength of its need. And the whole height of this pyramid exceeded 7 miles, by near a mile, and above it was a tower from which the watchmen looked, these being called the Monstruacans. Monstruacans. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but where the redoubt was built I know not, save that I believe in a mighty valley, of which I may tell more in due time. And when the pyramid was built, the last millions who were the builders thereof went within, and made themselves a great house and city of this last redoubt. And thus began the second history of this world. And how shall I set it all down in these little pages? For my task, even as I see it, is too great for the power of a single life and a single pen. Yet to it. And later, through hundreds of thousands of years, there grew up in the outer lands, beyond those which lay under the guard of the redoubt, many and lost races of terrible creatures, half men and half beast, and evil and dreadful, and these made war upon the redoubt, but were beaten off from that grim metal mountain with a vast slaughter. Yet must there have been many such attacks, until the electric circle was put about the pyramid, and lit from the earth current. And the lowest half-mile of the pyramid was sealed, and so at last there was a peace, and the beginnings of that eternity of quiet watching for the day when the earth current shall become exhausted. And, at whiles, through the forgotten centuries, had the creatures been glutted time and again upon such odd bands of daring ones as had adventured forth to explore through the mystery of the night lands. For of those who went, scarce any did ever return, for there were eyes in all that dark, and powers and forces abroad which had all knowledge, or so we must fain believe. And then, so it would seem, as that eternal night lengthened itself upon the world, the power of terror grew and strengthened. And fresh and greater monsters developed and bred out of all space and outward dimensions, attracted, even as it might be infernal sharks, by that lonely and mighty hill of humanity facing its end, so near to the eternal, and yet so far deferred in the minds and to the senses of those humans. And thus hath it been ever. And all this but by the way, and vague and ill-told, and set out in despair to make a little clear the beginnings of that state which is so strange to our conceptions, and yet which had become a condition of naturalness to humanity in that stupendous future. Thus had the giants come, fathered of bestial humans and mothered of monsters. And many and diverse were the creatures which had some human semblance, and intelligence, mechanical and cunning. So that certain of these lesser brutes had machinery and underground ways, having need to secure to themselves warmth and air, even as healthy humans. So that they were incredibly inured to hardship, as they might be wolves set in comparison with tender children. And surely, do I make this thing clear? And now, to continue my telling concerning the Nightland. The Watcher of the South was, as I have set to make known, a monster differing from those other watching things of which I have spoken, and of which there were in all 4, one to the northwest, and one to the southeast, and of these I have told. And the other twain lay brooding, one to the southwest, and the other to the northeast. And thus the 4 watchers kept ward through the darkness upon the pyramid, and moved not, neither gave they out any sound. Yet we did know them to be mountains of living watchfulness, and hideous and steadfast intelligence. And so, in a while, having listened to the sorrowful sound which came ever to us over the grey dunes, from the country of wailing, which lay to the south, midway between the redoubt and the watcher of the south, I passed upon one of the moving roadways over to the southwestern side of the pyramid, and looked from a narrow embrasure thence far down into the deep valley, which was 4 miles deep, and in which was the pit of the red smoke. And the mouth of this pit was 1 full mile across, and the smoke of the pit filled the valley at times, so that it seemed but as a glowing red circle amid dull, thunderous clouds of redness. Yet the red smoke rose never much above the valley, so that there was clear sight across to the country beyond. And there, along the further edge of that great depth, were the towers, each maybe a mile high, grey and quiet, but with a shimmer upon them. Beyond these, south and west of them, was the enormous bulk of the southwest watcher, and from the ground rose what we named the eye-beam, a single ray of grey light, which came up out of the ground, and lit the right eye of the monster. And because of this light, that eye had been mightily examined through unknown thousands of years, and some held that the eye looked through the light steadfastly at the pyramid, but others set out that the light blinded it, and was the work of those other powers which were abroad to do combat with the evil forces. But however this may be, as I stood there in the embrasure and looked at the thing through my spyglass, it seemed to my soul that the brute looked straightly at me, unwinking and steadfast, and fully of a knowledge that I spied upon it. And this is how I felt. To the north of this, in the direction of the west, I saw the place where the Silent Ones kill, and this was so named because there, maybe 10,000 years gone, certain humans adventuring from the pyramid came off the road where the Silent Ones walk, and into that place, and were immediately destroyed. And this was told by one who escaped, though he died also very quickly, for his heart was frozen. And this I cannot explain, but so it was set out in the records. Far away beyond the place where the Silent Ones kill, in the very mouth of the western night, was the place of the abhumans, where was lost the road where the Silent Ones walk, in a dull green, luminous mist. And of this place nothing was known, though much it held the thoughts and attentions of our thinkers and imaginers, for some said that there was a place of safety, differing from the redoubt, as we of this day suppose heaven to differ from earth, and that the road led thence, but was barred by the abhumans. And this I can only set down here, but with no thought to justify or uphold it. Later I travelled over to the northeastern wall of the redoubt, and looked thence with my spyglass at the Watcher of the Northeast, the Crowned Watcher it was called, in that within the air above its vast head there hung always a blue, luminous ring, which shed a strange light downwards over the monster, showing a vast wrinkled brow, upon which an whole library had been writ, but putting to the shadow all the lower face, all save the ear, which came out from the back of the head, and belled towards the redoubt, and had been said by some observers in the past to have been seen to quiver. But how that might be I knew not, for no man of our days had seen such a thing. And beyond the watching thing was the place where the Silent Ones are never, close by the great road, which was bounded upon the far side of the giants by the giant's sea, and upon the far side of that was a road which was always named the Road by the Quiet City, for it passed along that place where burned forever the constant and never-moving lights of a strange city, but no glass had ever shown life there, neither had any light ever ceased to burn. And beyond that again was the Black Mist. And here, let me say, that the Valley of the Hounds ended towards the lights of the Quiet City. And so I have set out something of that land, and of those creatures and circumstances which beset us about, waiting until the day of doom, when our earth current should cease, and leave us helpless to the watchers and the abundant terror. And there I stood, and looked forth composedly, as may one who has been born to know of such matters, and reared in the knowledge of them. And anon I would look upward, and see the grey, metalled mountain going up measureless into the gloom of the everlasting night, and from my feet the sheer downward sweep of the grim metal walls, 6 full miles, and more, to the plain below. And one thing, ay, and I fear many, have I missed to set out with particularness. There was, as you do know, all around the base of the pyramid, which was 5 1/4 miles every way, a great circle of light, which was set up by the earth current, and burned within a transparent tube, or had that appearance. And it bounded the pyramid for a clear mile upon every side, and burned forever, and none of the monsters had power ever to pass across, because of what we did call the air clog, that it did make, as an invisible wall of safety. And it did give out also a more subtle vibration, that did affect the weak brain elements of the monsters and the lower men brutes. And some did hold that there went from it a further vibration of a greater subtleness that gave a protecting against evil forces. And some quality it had truly this wise, for the evil powers had no ability to cause harm to any within. Yet were there some dangers against which it might not avail, but these had no cunning to bring harm to any within the great redoubt, who had wisdom to meddle with no dreadfulness. And so were those last millions guarded until the earth current should be used to its end. And this circle is that which I have called the electric circle, though with failure to explain. But there it was called only the circle. And thus have I, with great effort, made a little clear that grim land of night, where presently my listening heard one calling across the dark. And how that this grew upon me, I will set out forthwith. Chapter 3. The Quiet Calling. Now, oft had I heard tell, not only in that great city which occupied the 1,000th floor, but in others of the 1,320 cities of the pyramid, that there was somewhere out in the desolation of the nightlands a second place of refuge, where had gathered, in another part of this dead world, some last millions of the human race, to fight unto the end. And this story I heard everywhere in my travels through the cities of the great redoubt, which travels began when I came upon my 17th year, and continued for 3 years and 225 days, being even then but 1 day in each city, as was the custom in the training of every child. And truly it was a great journey, and in it I met with many, whom to know was love. And truly it was a great journey, and in it I met with many, whom to know was to love, but whom never could I see again, for life has not space enough, and each must to his duty to the security and well-being of the redoubt. Yet, for all that I have set down, we travelled much, always, but there were so many millions, and so few years. And, as I have said, everywhere I went there was the same story of this other place of refuge, and in such of the libraries of those cities as I had time to search, there were great numbers of works upon the existence of this other refuge, and some, far back in the years, made assertion with confidence that such a place was in verity, and indeed no doubt did there seem in those bygone ages, but now these very records were read only by scholars, who doubted even whilst they read. And so it is ever. But of the reality of this refuge I had never a sound doubt, from the day of my hearing concerning it from our master Monstruican, who with all his assistants occupied the tower of observation in the apex of the pyramid. And here let me tell that he and I had always an affinity and close friendship for one for the other, though he was full grown, and I but a youth. Yet so it was. And thus, when I had come to an age of 21 years of life, he opened to me a post within the tower of observation, and this was a most wondrous good fortune to me, for in all the vast redoubt, to be appointed to the tower of observation was the most desired, for thereby, even as in these days doth astronomy, was the natural curiosity of man eased somewhat, even while thwarted. Now, let me tell here also, lest it be thought that I was unduly favoured because of my friendship with the Master Monstruican, that there was a sound justification for his choice, in that to me had been given that strange gift of hearing, which we called night-hearing, though this was but a fanciful name, and meant little. Yet the peculiar gift was rare, and in all the millions of the pyramid there was none with the gift to a great degree, saving only myself. And I, because of this gift, could hear the invisible vibrations of the ether, so that, without harking to the calling of our recording instruments, I could take the messages which came continually through the eternal darkness, aye, even better than they. And now it may be the better understood how much was to be counted that I had grown to listen for a voice that had not rung in my ears for an eternity, and yet which sang sweet and clear in my memory dreams, so that it seemed to me that Mirdath the Beautiful slept within my soul, and whispered to me out of all the ages. And then, one day, at the 15th hour, when began the sleep-time, I had been pondering this love of mine that lived with me still, and marvelling that my memory dreams held the voice of a love that had been in so remote an age. And pondering and dreaming thus, as a young man may, I could fancy this aeon-lost one were whispering beauty into my ears, in verity. So clear had my memory grown, and so much had I pondered. And lo, as I stood there, harking and communing with my thoughts, I thrilled suddenly, as if I had been smitten, for out of all the everlasting night a whisper was thrilling and thrilling upon my more subtle hearing. Through 4 long years I had listened, since that awakening in the embrasure, when but a youth of 17, and now out of the world darkness and all the eternal years of that lost life, which now I live in this present age of ours, was the whisper come, for I knew it upon that instant, and yet, because I was so taught to wisdom, I answered by no name, but sent the master word through the night, sending it with my brain elements, as I could, and as all may, much or little as may be, if they be not clods. And, moreover, I knew that she who called quietly would have the power to hear without instruments, if indeed it were she, and if it were but one of the false callings of the evil forces, or more cunning monsters, or, as was sometimes thought concerning these callings, the house of silence, meddling with our souls, then would they have no power to say the master word, for this had been proven through all the everlasting. I'm going to reread that, because that is a long sentence. And, moreover, I knew that she who called quietly would have the power to hear without instruments, if indeed it were she, and if it were but one of the false callings of the evil forces, or more cunning monsters, or, as was sometimes thought concerning these callings, the house of silence, meddling with our souls, then would they have no power to say the master word, for this had been proven through all the everlasting. And lo, as I stood, trembling and striving not to be tense, which destroys the receptivity, there came thrilling round and round my spiritual essence the throb of the master word, beating steadily in the night, as doth that marvellous sound. And then, with all that was sweet in my spirit, I called with my brain elements, Meredith! 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 And in that instant the master Monstruacan entered that part of the tower of observation where I stood, and, seeing my face, stood very quiet, for though he had not the power of night hearing, he was wise and thoughtful, and took much account of my gift. Moreover, he had but come from the receiving instrument, and thought vaguely to have caught the throb of the master word, though too faint to come proper through the instrument, so that he searched for me, in that I, who had the hearing, might listen for it, I being, as I have said, gifted in that wise. And to him I told something of my story and my thoughts and my memories, and of that awakening, and thus up to this present happening, and thus up to this present happening, and he hearkened with sympathy and a troubled and wondering heart. For in that age a man might talk sanely upon that which, in this age of ours, would be accounted foolishness, and maybe the breathings of insanity. For there, by the refinement of arts of mentality and the results of strange experiments and the accomplishment of learning, men were able to conceive of matters now closed to our conceptions, even as we of this day may haply give a calm ear to talk that in the days of our fathers would have been surely set to the count of lunacy. And this is very clear. And all the while that I told my story, I listened with my spirit, but save for a sense of faint, happy laughter that wrapped about me, I heard not. There was a semicolon there that I missed, my bad. And all the while that I told my story, I listened with my spirit, but save for a sense of faint, happy laughter that wrapped about me, I heard not. And nothing more all that day. Here let me put down that, because of my memories and half-memories, I would time and again dispute with our learned men, they being in doubt as to the verity of that olden story of the days of light, and the existence of the sun, though something of all this was set out, as of truth, in our oldest records. But I, remembering, told them many tales that seemed fairy-like to them, and entranced their hearts, even whilst I angered their brains, which refused to take seriously and as verity that which their hearts accepted gladly, even as we receive the wonder of poetry into our souls. But the master Monstruacan would listen to aught I had to tell, aye, though I spoke through hours, and so it would be, odd times, that having talked long, drawing my stories from my memory dreams, I would come back again into the present of that future, and lo, all the Monstruacans would have left their instruments and observations and recording, and be gathered about me, and the master so sunken in interest that he not to have discovered them, neither had I noticed, being so full of the things which had been. But when the master came back to knowledge of that present, he would rouse and chide, and they, all those lesser ones, would fly swiftly and guiltily to their various works. And yet, so I have thought since, each with a muddled and bewildered and thoughtful air upon him, and hungry they were for more, and ever wondering and setting questions about. And so it was also with those others, those learned ones who were not of the tower of observation, and who disbelieved even whilst they hungered. Listen would they, though I talked from the first hour, which was the dawn, to the 15th hour, which was the beginning of the night. Dawn and night are in quotation marks, for the sleep time was set thus, after other usage and experiment. And, because they don't have there's no sun. And, odd whiles, I found that there were among them men of extraordinary learning who upheld my tellings as tales of verity, and so there was a faction. But, later, there grew more to believe, and whether they believed or not, all were ready to listen, so that I might have spended my days in talk, only that I had my work to do. But the Master Monstruican believed from the beginning, and was wise always to understand, so that I loved him for this, as for many another dear quality. And so, as may be conceived, among all those millions I was singled out to be known, for the stories that I told went downward through 1,000 cities, and, presently, in the lowest tier of the underground fields, 100 miles deep in the earth below the redoubt, I found that the very ploughboys knew something concerning my tellings, and gathered about me one time and another when the Master Monstruican and I had gone down, regarding some matter that dealt with the earth current and our instruments. And the underground fields, though in that age we called them no more than the fields, I should set down a little, for they were the mightiest work of this world, so that even the last redoubt was but a small thing beside them. 100 miles deep lay the lowest of the underground fields, and was 100 miles from side to side every way. And above it there were 306 fields, each one less in area than that beneath, and in this wise they tapered, until the topmost field, which lay direct beneath the lowermost floor of the great redoubt, was but 4 miles every way. And thus it will be seen that these fields, lying one beneath the other, formed a mighty and incredible pyramid of country lands in the deep earth, 100 miles from the base unto the topmost field. And the whole was sheathed in at the sides with the grey metal of which the redoubt was builded, and each field was pillared and floored beneath the soil with this same compound of wonder. And so was it secure, and the monsters could not dig into that mighty garden from without. And all of that underground land was lit, where needed, by the earth current, and that same life stream fructified the soil, and gave life and blood to the plants and to the trees, and to every bush and natural thing. And the making of those fields had taken maybe 1,000,000 years, and the dump thereof had been cast into the crack, whence came the earth current, and which had bottom beyond all soundings. And this underground country had its own winds and air currents, so that, to my memory, it was in no ways connected to the monstrous air shafts of the pyramid. But in this I may be mistaken, for it has not been given to me to know all that is to be known concerning that vast redoubt, nor by any one man could so much knowledge be achieved. Yet that there were wise and justly promoted winds in that underground country, I do know. For healthful and sweet they are, and in the cornfields there was the sweetest rustle of grain, and the glad silken laughter of poppies, all beneath a warm and happy light. And here did the millions walk and take excursion, and go orderly or not, even as in these days. And all this I have seen, and the talk of 1,000 lovers in the gardens of that place comes back to me, and with it all the memory of my dear one, and of a faint calling that would seem to whisper about me at times, but so faint and attenuated that even I, who had the night hearing, could not catch its import, and so went, listening ever the more intently, and oft-times calling. Now there was a law in the pyramid, tried and healthful, which held that no male should have freedom to adventure into the nightland before the age of 22, and no female ever. Yet that, after such age, if a youth desired greatly to make the adventure, he should receive 3 lectures upon the dangers of which we had knowledge, and a strict account of the mutilatings and horrid deeds done to those who had so adventured. And if, after this had passed over him, he still desired, and if he were accounted healthful and sane, then should he be allowed to make the adventure, and it was accounted honor to the youth who should add to the knowledge of the pyramid. But to all such as went forth into the danger of the night land, there was set beneath the skin of the inner side of the left forearm a small capsule, and when the wound had healed, then might the youth make the adventure. And the wherefore of this was that the spirit of the youth might be saved, if he were entrapped, for then, upon the honor of his soul, must he bite forth the capsule, and immediately his spirit would have safety in death. And by this shall you know somewhat the grim and horrid danger of the dark land. And this I have set down because later I was to make huge adventure into those lands, and even at this time some thought of the same had come to me, for always I went listening for that quiet calling, and twice I sent the master word throbbing solemnly through the everlasting night. Yet this I did no more, without certainty, for the word must not be used lightly. But often I would say with my brain elements, Mirdath! Mirdath! Sending the name out into the darkness, and sometimes would I seem to hear the faint thrilling of the ether around me, as though one answered, but weakly, as it were with a weakened spirit, or by his instrument that lacked of its earth force. And thus for a great while there was no certainty, but only a strange anxiousness, and no clear answer. Then, one day, as I stood by the instruments of the tower of observation, at the 13th hour there came the thrilling of beaten ether all about me, as it were that all the void was disturbed. And I made the sign for silence, so that the men moved not in all the tower, but bowed over their breathing bells, that all disturbance might cease. And again came the gentle thrilling, and broke out into a clear, low calling in my brain, and the calling was my name, the old earth name of this day, and not the name of that age. And the name smote me with a frightenedness of fresh awakening memories. And immediately I sent the master word into the night, and all the ether was full of movement. And a silence came, and later a beat afar off in the void of night, which only I in all that great redoubt could hear, until the heavier vibrations were come. And in a moment there was all about me the throbbing of the master word, beating in the night a sure answer. Yet before this I knew that Mirdath had called, but now had surety. And immediately I said, Mirdath, making use of the instruments, and there came a swift and beautiful answer, for out of the dark there stole an old love name, that she only had ever used to me. And presently I minded me of the men, and signed to them that they should continue, for the records must not be broken, and now I had the communication full established. And by me stood the master Monstruacan, quietly as any young Monstruacan, waiting with slips to make any notes that were needful, and keeping a strict eye upon those others, but not unkindly. And so, for a space of wonder, I had speech with that girl out in the darkness of the world, who had knowledge of my name, and of the old earth love name, and named herself Mirdath. And much I questioned her, and presently to my sorrow, for it seemed that her name was not truly Mirdath, but Naani. Neither had she known my name, but that in the library of that place where she abode there had been a story of one called by my name, and called by that sweet love name which she had sent out somewhat ruthless into the night. And the girl's name had been Mirdath, and when first she, Naani, had called, there had come back to her a cry of Mirdath, Mirdath, and this had minded her so strangely of that olden story which had stayed in her memory, that she had answered as the maid in that book might have answered. And thus did it seem that the utter romance of my memory love had vanished, and I stood strangely troubled for sorrow of a love of olden times. Yet, even then I marveled that any book should have stories so much like to mine, not heeding that the history of all love is writ with one pen. Yet, even then, in that hour of my strange and quaintly foolish pain, there came a thing that set me thrilling, though more afterwards, when I came to think afresh upon it. For the girl who spoke to me through the night made some wonder that my voice were not deeper, yet in quiet fashion, and as one who says a thing, scarce wotting what they say. But even to me then there came a sudden hope, for in the olden days of this present age my voice had been very deep. And I said to her that maybe the man in the book was said to have had a deep tone of speech, but she, seeming puzzled, said nay, and at that I questioned her the more, but only to the trouble of her memory and understanding. And strange it must seem, and strange must it seem that we two should talk on so trivial a matter, when there was so much else that we had need to exchange thought upon. For were a man in this present day to have speech with those who may live within that red planet of Mars within the sky, scarce could the wonder of it exceed the wonder of a human voice coming through that night unto the great redoubt, out of all that lost darkness. For, indeed, this must have been the breaking of, maybe, 1,000,000 years of silence. And already, as I came to know later, was the news passing downward from city to city through all the vast pyramid, so that the hour slips were full of the news, and every city eager and excited, and waiting. And I better known in that one moment than in all my life before, for that previous calling had been but vaguely put about, and then set to the count of a nature blown upon over easily by spirit winds of the half-memory of dreams. Though it is indeed true, as I have set down before this, that my tales concerning the early days of the world, when the sun was visible and full of light, had gone down through all the cities, and had much comment and setting forth in the hour slips, and were a cause for speech and argument. Now, concerning the voice of this girl coming to us through the darkness of the world, I will set out that which she had to tell, and this, indeed, but verified the tellings of our most ancient records, which had so long been treated over lightly. There was, it would seem, somewhere out in the lonesome dark of the outer lands, but at what distance none could ever discover, a second redoubt, that was a 3-sided pyramid, and moderate small, being no more than 1 mile in height, and scarce 3/4 of a mile along the bases. When this redoubt was first builded, it had been upon the far shore of a sea, where now was no sea, and it had been raised by those wandering humans who had grown weary of wandering, and weary of the danger of night attacks by the tribes of half-human monsters, which began to inhabit the earth even so early as the days when the half-gloom was upon the world. And he that had made the plan upon which it was builded was one who had seen the great redoubt, having lived there in the beginning, but escaped because of a correction set upon him for his spirit of irresponsibility, which had made him to cause disturbance among the orderly ones in the lowest city of the great redoubt. Yet, in time, he too had come to be tamed by the weight of fear of the ever-growing hordes of monsters, and the forces that were abroad. And so he, being a master spirit, planned and builded the smaller redoubt, being aided thereto by 4 millions, who also were weary of the harass of the monsters, but until then had been wanderers, because of the restlessness of their blood. And they had chosen that place, because there they had discovered a sign of the earth current in a great valley which led to the shore, for without the earth current no refuge could have existence. And whilst many builded and guarded, and cared for the great camp in which all lived, others worked within a great shaft, and in 10 years had made this to a distance of many miles, and therewith they tapped the earth current, but not a great stream, yet a sufficiency, as was believed. And presently, after many years, they had builded the pyramid, and taken up their refuge there, and made them instruments, and ordained monstruicans, so that they had speech daily with the Great Pyramid, and thus for many long ages. And the earth current then began, because he changes tense. And the earth current then begin, and the earth current then to begin to fail, and though they labored through many thousands of years, they came to no better resource. And so it was they ceased to have communication with the great redoubt, for the current had a lack of power to work the instruments, and the recording instruments ceased to be sensible of our messages. And thereafter came 1,000,000 years, maybe, of silence, with ever the birthing and marrying and dying of those lonesome humans. And they grew less. And some put this to the lack of the earth current, which dwindled slowly through the centuries of that eternity. And once in 1,000 years, maybe, one among them would be sensitive, and abled to hear beyond ordinary, and to these, at times, there would seem to come the thrilling of the ether, so that such a one would go listening, and sometimes seem to catch half messages, and so awaken a great interest in all the pyramid, and there would be turning up of old records, and many words and writings, and attempts to send the master word through the night, in which, doubtless, they sometimes succeeded, for there was set down in the records of the great redoubt certain occasions on which there had come the call of the master word, which had been arranged and made holy between the two redoubts in the early days of that second life of this world. Yet, now for 100,000 years, there had been none sensitive, and in that time the people of the pyramid had become no more than 10,000, and the earth current was weak and powerless to put the joy of life into them, so that they went listlessly, but deemed it not strange because of so many eons of usage. And then, to the wonder of all, the earth current had put forth a new power, so that young people ceased to be old over soon, and there was happiness and a certain joy in the living, and a strange birthing of children, such as had not been through 500,000 years. And then came a new thing. Nani, the daughter of the master monstruican of that redoubt, had shown to all that she was sensitive, for she had perceived odd vibrations afloat in the night, and concerning these she told her father, and presently, because their blood moved afresh in their bodies, they had heart to discover the plans of the ancient instruments, for the instruments had long rusted and been forgotten. And so they builded them a new instrument to send forth a message, for they had no memory at that time that the brain elements had power to do thus, though, mayhap, their brain elements were weakened through so many ages of starvation of the earth current, and could not have obeyed, even had their masters known all that we of the great redoubt knew. And when the instrument was finished, to Nani was given the right to call first across the dark, to discover whether indeed, after that 1,000,000 years of silence, they were yet companied upon this earth, or whether they were in truth lonely, the last poor thousands of the humans. And a great and painful excitement came upon the people of the Lesser Pyramid, for the loneliness of the world pressed upon them, and it was to them as though we in this age called to a star across the abyss of space. And because of the excitement and pain of the moment, Nani called only vaguely with the instrument into the dark, and lo, in a moment, as it seemed, there came all about her in the night the solemn throb of the master word, beating in the night. And Nani cried out that she was answered, and, as may be thought, many of the people wept, and some prayed, and some were silent, but others beseeched her that she call again, and quickly, to have further speech with those of their kind. And Nani spoke the master word into the night, and directly there came a calling all about her, "Mirdath! Mirdath!" And the strange wonder of it made her silent a moment, but when she would have made reply, the instrument had ceased to work, and she could have no further speech at that time. This, as may be thought, occasioned much distress, and constant work and constant work they had between the instrument and the earth current to discover the reason for this failing, but could not for a great while. And in that time oft did Nani hear the call of Murdath thrilling about her, and twice there came the solemn beat of the master word in the night. Yet never had she the power to answer. And all that while, as I learned in time, was she stirred with a quaint ache at heart by the voice that called Murdath, as it might be the spirit of love searching for its mate, for this is how she put it. And thus it chanced that the constant thrilling of this name about her woke her to memory of a book she had read in early years, and but half understood, for it was ancient and writ in an olden fashion, and it set out the love of a man and a maid, and the maid's name was Myrdath. And so, because she was full of this great awakening of those ages of silence, and calling of that name, she found the book again, and read it many times, and grew to a sound love of the beauty of that tale. And presently, when the instrument was made right, she called into the night the name of that man within the book, and so it came about that I had hoped too much, yet even now I was strangely unsure whether to cease from hoping. And one other thing there is which I would make clear. Many and oft a time I had heard a thrilling of sweet, faint laughter about me, and the stirring of the ether by words too gentle to come clearly, and these I make no doubt came from Nani, using her brain elements unwittingly and in ignorance, but very eager to answer my callings, and having no knowledge that, far off across the blackness of the world, they thrilled about me constantly. And after Nani had made clear all that I have set out concerning the lesser refuge, she told further how that food was not plentiful with them, though, until the reawakening of the earth current, they had gone unknowing of this, being of small appetite and caring little for aught, but now wakened and newly hungry, they savoured a lack of taste in all that they ate, and this we could well conceive, from our reasonings and theory, but happily not from our knowledge. And we said unto them that the soil had lost its life, and the crops wherefrom were not vital, and a great while it would take for the earth within their pyramid to receive back the life elements. And we told them certain ways by which they might bring a more speedy life to the soil, and this they were eager to do, being freshly alive after so long a time of half-life. And now you must know that in all the great redoubt the story went downwards swiftly, and was published in all the hour sheets, with many comments, and the libraries were so full of those who would look up the olden records, which for so long had been forgotten, or taken, as we of this day would say, with a pinch of salt. And all the time I was pestered with questions, so that, had I not been determined, I should scarce have been allowed to sleep. Moreover, so much was writ about me, and my power to hear, and divers stories concerning tales of love, that I had been like to have grown mazed to take note of it all. Yet some note I did take, and found much pleasant, but some displeasing. And, for the rest, I was not spoiled, as the saying goes, for I had my work to do. Moreover, I was always busied listening, and having speech through the darkness. Though if any saw me so, they would question, and because of this I kept much to the tower of observation, where was the master Monstruican, and a greater discipline. And then began a fresh matter, though but an old enough trick, for I speak now of the days that followed that reopening of the talk between the pyramids. Oft would speech come to us out of the night, and there would be tales of the sore need of the lesser redoubt, and callings for help. Yet, when I sent the master word abroad, there would be no answering. And so I feared that the monsters and forces of evil knew. Yet, at times, the master word would answer to us, beating steadily in the night, and when we questioned afresh, we knew that they in the lesser redoubt had caught the beat of the master word, and so made reply, though it had not been they who had made the previous talk, which we had sought to test by the word. and then they would make contradiction of all that had been spoken so cunningly, so that we knew the monsters and forces had sought to tempt in some that from... jeez. I got lost and tried to reconnect with it and failed. And then they would make contradiction of all that had been spoken so cunningly, so that we knew the monsters and forces had sought to tempt some from the safety of the redoubt. Yet this was no new thing, as I have made to hint, saving that it grew now to a greater persistence, and there was a loathsome cunning in the using of this new knowledge to the making of wicked and false messages by those evil things of the night land. And it told to us, as I have made remark, how that those monsters and frickadoodle, I got lost again. Give me one sec here. Sorry about that. Here we are. Yet, let me just take the paragraph from the top. Yet at times the master word would answer to us, beating steadily in the night, and when we questioned afresh, we knew that they in the lesser redoubt had caught the beat of the master word, and so made reply, though it had not been they who had made the previous talk, which we had sought to test by the word. And then they would make contradiction of all that had been spoken so cunningly, so that we knew the monsters and forces had sought to tempt some from the safety of the redoubt. Yet was this no new thing, as I have made to hint, saving that it grew now to a greater persistence, and there was a loathsome cunning in the using of this new knowledge to the making of wicked and false messages by those evil things of the night land. And it told to us, as I have made remark, how that those monsters and forces had a full awareness of the speech between the pyramids. Yet could they have no power to say the master word, so had we some test left, and a way to sure knowledge of what made talk in the night. And all that I have told should bring to those of this age something of the yet unbegotten terror of that, and a quiet and sound thankfulness to God that we suffer not as humanity shall yet suffer. But for all this, let it not be thought that they of that age accounted it as suffering, but as no more than the usual of human existence. And by this may we know that we can meet all circumstances, and use ourselves to them, and live through them wisely, if we be but prudent and consider means of invention. And through all the night land there was an extraordinary awakening of the monsters and forces, so that the instruments made constant note of greater powers at work out there in the darkness, and the monstruicans were busied recording, and keeping a very strict watch. And so was there at all that time a sense of difference and awakening, and of wonders about, and to come. And from the country whence comes the great laughter, the laughter sounded constant, as it were an uncomfortable and heart-shaking voice thunder rolling thence over the lands, out from the unknown east. And the pit of the red smoke filled all the deep valley with redness, so that the smoke rose above the edge, and hid the bases of the towers upon the far side. And the giants could be seen plentiful around the kilns to the east, and from the kilns great belches of fire, though the meaning of it, as of all else, we could not say, but only the cause. and from the mountain of the voice, which rose to the southeast of the southeast watcher, and of which I have made no telling hitherto, in this faulty setting out, I heard for the first time in that life the calling of the voice. And though the records made mention of it, yet not often was it heard. And the calling was shrill, and very peculiar, and distressful, and horrible, as though a giant woman, hungering strangely, shouted unknown words across the night. And this was how it seemed to me, and many thought this to describe the sound. And by all this may you perceive how that land was awakened. And other tricks there were to entice us into the night land, and once a call came thrilling in the ether, and told us that certain humans had escaped from the lesser redoubt, and drew nigh to us, but were faint for food and craved succor. Yet, when we sent the master word into the night, the creatures without could make no reply, which was a very happy thing for our souls, for we had been all mightily exercised in our hearts by this one message, and now had proof that it was but a trap. And constantly, and at all hours, I would have speech with Nani of the lesser redoubt, for I had taught her how she might send her thoughts through the night, with her brain elements, but not to overuse this power, for it exhausts the body and the powers of the mind, if it be abused by exceeding usage. Yet, despite that I had taught her the use of her brain elements, she sent her message always without strength, save when she had use of the instrument, and this I set to the cause that she had not the health force needful, but, apart from this, she had the night hearing very keen, though less than mine. And so, with many times of speech and constant tellings of our doings and thoughts, we drew near in the spirit to one another, and had always a feeling in our hearts that we had been given previous acquaintance. And this, as may be thought, thrilled my heart very strangely. And that is where we will call it for this week. That went a bit longer than I expected, so I'm thinking it's going to take us a bit longer to get through than I had initially anticipated. But that's okay. Call it 6 installments, tentatively? Yeah, let's call it 6 tentatively. Ah, Frank Misers, it was you! Sorry. I keep thinking that it's other people, but it was you this whole time. Who craved the greatest cosmic horror love story ever put to pen. So yes, we are doing the Nightland at long last. And thus you may have some idea of what we are up against. Those of you not familiar with this work. I think I muscled through it pretty well. I probably put the wrong emphasis on incorrect syllables or incorrect portions of certain sentences. But, like, it is, suffice it to say, it is a challenging read. So, for a good example, because I have, unlike what I've done with most of C.J. Cherryh's work, now that I have my own personal recording of this done, for this installment, I can go and read you through, let me, read you through, a paragraph. So you have some idea of how this thing is paced out. Let me find a good one here. That's just, really, tricky one. Run-on sentences abound with tons of punctuation, as only C.J. Cherryh would do in modern eras. So here's one.
And because of the excitement and pain of the moment, comma, Nani called only vaguely with the instrument into the dark, semicolon, and lo, exclamation point, in a moment, comma, as it seemed, comma, there came all about her in the night, there came all about her in the night the solemn throb of the master hyphen word, comma, beating in the night, period. And Nani cried out that she was answered, comma, and, comma, as may be thought, comma, many of the people wept, comma, and some prayed, comma, and some were silent, semicolon. But others beseeched her that she call again and quickly to have further speech with those of their kind, period. So that's what I'm up against, is stuff like that. And knowing which of those commas to kind of try and not read aloud, so to speak, and be like, oh, some of these are unnecessary. Otherwise, I'm doing little gaps between words and sentences, and it gets completely bonkers. But I think even with that, like, and I know when I was first reading it, I was mildly frustrated. I'm like, this is brutal. But even with that, you can like see through to the scale and scope of the brilliant thing that is this world he has created. There's a reason that it has had such a cult following, as I've learned. And it's very clear once you've read it. It's like, oh, it has a cult following because it's brilliant. It's like this brilliant world that he's built. This brilliant setting that has room for all sorts of adventures beside the one that we're going to have. In eras earlier, in eras later, in eras to the side. It's even concurrent. There's just such room there. And so many book covers. There's a few more that I have yet to get that I'll get a hold of so we can add to the list. Some of them are pretty nice. Like I don't have the Japanese ones, as I mentioned. I want to get a hold of those. But yeah, so we have embarked now on the Nightland. We start off with kind of a fairly typical, almost schmaltzy love story, very much reminiscent of oh geez. Maybe Jane Austen. Heathcliff. Images of someone sprinting through the moors towards their lost love. Something like that. But then we move to something that's very different, but is tied in due to this emotional connection. Oh my god, the Nightland is a perfect setting. I agree. Frank Misers. Frank Misers says, I'm just going to say it, this book would make a great video game. Absolutely. It's like, even if it was a, quote, walking simulator, unquote, which I don't think it would have to be, it would be magnificent. It's such a beautifully realized, even through his thick and treacherous prose, it's such a beautiful setting. It's horrifying, but it's beautiful at the same time. It's really, and we'll get there. Like, we've already had an inkling that, wow, there's a lot of details being thrown at us. But we're going to have, like, these really soulful descriptions of things, so that there is beauty in this drear world where the suns have burned out. Like, there are no more stars. We're at the end of the universe. And it's written in a time where they can be forgiven, oh, well, you didn't know that the sun would last billions of years. And I'm like, well, he's actually kind of accounted for that. But, oh, wouldn't everything be frozen? And it's like, no, he's actually got that covered. It's sort of, from our modern perspective, sort of, oh, well, that's sort of silly. But it works in context, I find, very well, so that I'm not thrown out of it by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, it's great. The imagery involved is just stellar. Honestly, might be some of the best realized imagery of its type ever. I mean, like, he does a great combination of leaving certain details vague, but also being extremely specific about others. in a way that brings it to more believable life than stuff that, say, H.P. Lovecraft would do. Whereas H.P. Lovecraft is always kind of like the way something is referred to, just the conceptual horror. Sometimes with some specifics, but and usually the racist specifics, unfortunately. But also like, kind of talking around the shape of something. This will talk around the shape of something, but will also call out very specific details. So there's wonder and mystery and like concreteness there that I find very compelling. So it comes as no surprise that there is a great following for this. Tons of fan fiction made in the setting, and around the setting, as I have learned. I may go through and find some selections of those at some point, and do them, because some of them are some of the ones I've read have been pretty good. Let me think. Anything else salient? Not much. But yeah, no, it would make a great video game. It's a dream, but it's more real than reality, isn't it? It kind of doesn't matter. It can be both. And that's one of the reasons it works very well, is that it is sort of both. It is a dream. It's very dreamy, but it's real to him. But yeah, it could be like a dream dimension, but it's a very thoroughly realized one. In here I have a couple fan art images of maps. None of them are the same. So there is plenty of room, even though he's given some specific directions and vectors for certain things. There's plenty of room for imagining how the world is set out and set up and mapped out. We're only ultimately going to see a certain portion of the world. We're not going to see the whole thing, but we're going to have a lot of it described. But yeah, good times ahead. So between this and the stuff I'm reading by William Sloan on Wednesdays in the Rim of Morning 2 story collection, in which we are in, what is it called? To Walk the Night. We will have our spooky autumnal stuff done for this year. I have other things I'll do in following years. I've got a couple Stephen King adjacent ones I might do. I have a fairly small collection of horror novels. Well, not a mountain, but a couple. They're around. It's not that I dislike the genre. I don't. At some point I'll have to do Vampires by John Stakely, which is like the only book other than Armor that he wrote that I know of, which is a crying shame, because it's the one that got like a movie adaptation, which is kind of wild. There's some name cross-pollination between the two, which is cute. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff I can do for going forward. I am not shooting my wad, so to speak. The next stream is Friday. It'll be next Friday. So we are going to keep doing this every Friday. And then Mondays, right now we're reading through Full Metal Panic Book 6, Dancing Very Merry Christmas, which is not seasonally appropriate, but I don't care. Wednesdays, we're reading through William Sloan's To Walk the Night, and then Fridays, we'll be reading through The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. I know, one a week. It'll take us a while, but it'll give us something to look forward to. Or me to stress over, as the case may be, being like, oh my god, what crazy prose is he going to throw at me? So yes, I try to make them consistent, at a consistent time frame, largely so I have some structure. I may be changing that up come next year, but I won't. I will tell everyone in advance before that happens, if it happens. My schedule might be getting crowded on these days, and then I'll try and shift it around accordingly. Anyway, with that in mind, hopefully people enjoyed. Certainly I did. There is much to go, much before us. Some really good stuff. Yeah. other than that, let's see. Anything else? No. I guess long-term plans. We've just started this one. So after we finish with Full Metal Panic Book 6 for Mondays, I'll be doing the first volume of Legend of the Galactic Heroes by author whose name I can't remember right off the top of my head because I can't see it. It's out of the corner of my eye. And just far enough away that I can't read it. We'll be doing that. For Wednesdays, after we get through the Rim of Morning. Yeah, I think I'll do both stories. Well, maybe I'll just do one. Let me get to the end of To Walk the Night, and we'll see. Because I do want to get started on Cytine by C.J. Cherry before the end of the year, if I can. And after we finish The Nightland, I will be starting Endymion by... wow, I've just forgotten his name. That getting old is bad. Dan Simmons. That was a scary moment. There is a tie-in short story associated with that, but it happens afterwards, so we'll be reading it after we finish. It's what? Endymion and the Rise of Endymion? Or is it the Rise of Endymion followed by Endymion? I cannot remember. Endymion? I should really find out how that's pronounced, because I'm going to have to be saying it a lot. I think it's Endymion. Yeah, that's it. That's our future game plan, but that's not going to be for a while, like a month and a half at least. So, until then, we get to enjoy the Nightland. Yeah. So, noon o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I am doing some sort of a stream. And Fridays will be the Nightland days. The Nightland days? Whatever. Anyway, you get me. So with that, I will call it. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Don't let the changing of the seasons and the brutal reduction in active daylight hours get you too far down. Occasionally throughout like the last week or two, I've been like, oh my god, how many more weeks of this? And it's like, I think it's 60 days. It's a little less than 60 days. And then it starts brightening up. I do have an alert system or an event alert system set up on my Discord channel that says when they are scheduled. Occasionally I've forgotten to remove one when when I have like a unforeseen or only moderately foreseen scheduling issue. But usually I try to keep that accurate. And that should show what time it is for whoever's looking at it in their local time. I don't know that there's a way for me to do that on here. I know there's a way for me to do that on Discord, though. Anyway, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, or UTC minus 5 or 6, depending on what time of the year it is. Right now, I think it's UTC minus 5. I might be wrong in that, and if I am, my apologies. Anyway, with that, I will leave you all to it. I already did my other spiel. I think we're good. Toodaloo! Thanks for tuning in.